I can't believe we've got to season 3 of Start Here and have managed to avoid any rock or rock-adjacent genres. So for our first, we thought we'd go big, very loud and very classic, heavy metal. Now, you may have preconceived ideas about this genre. Hairy guys in leather trousers bent double over their guitars as they shred out power chords. But there's a lot more to this classic genre than you might think. This is Start Here, the podcast from the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music with me, Alexis Ffrench. And this is all about getting under the skin of a genre. I'm a pianist, composer and producer in a genre I call classical soul. I live in that world, but what about the worlds of dubstep, experimental, Latin? I'm excited to get into all of these genres in this series of Start Here. My expert for this episode couldn't be more perfect. Sophie K is a radio presenter, podcast host and expert on all things hard rock and heavy metal. And her partner also happens to play guitar for one of the UK's biggest metal bands, Skindred. Welcome, Sophie K and Mikey Demus.
Thank you very much.
What an entry.
I know.
Indeed.
Amazing.
Well, we're honoured. So we always kick off the show with the elevator pitch. This is the infamous elevator pitch. So it's where you give you frame your advocacy for the genre in a few pithy lines. So take it away, Sophie.
Before we do that,
Yeah.
can I have a bone to pick with you.
Okay.
Right? Because I was asked to send 5 to 10 songs
Yeah.
to bring to you. So I got stuck, couldn't do it, absolutely melted down, posted it on the internet,
Yes.
and you broke the internet.
Oh, dear.
You
Oh,
absolutely. So many people couldn't decide either, like how to break down the genre into. So congratulations are in order.
Well, we aim to please. How long did it take you to put that list together? Because I've been listening to it for about a whole week, and it's a crazy playlist, I have to say.
It is.
How long did it take you to put that together?
I think it took a couple of days because I had to be chased on it, and then Mike and I had an argument about it as well. And Mike's very disappointed with some of the songs I sent you.
I couldn't believe some of the stuff.
Oh, well, we'll get into that. I want to hear about all that
Yeah.
disagreement. That's fantastic.
I think that segues nicely into the elevator pitch, because the thing about metal is it's almost impossible to sum up, because there is something for everybody and it's open to everybody's individual interpretation.
Yeah.
So if someone's never heard metal before, it's as close as you'll ever get to going to church without believing in God. It's as close as you'll ever get to feeling community in that sense, and a sense of worship is the only way I can really put it, because metal is heavy music that talked about emotions and feelings. We talk about mental health now in 2025, but before all of this, metal was the place that you could turn to be heard, to be listened to. And it doesn't matter if you're an R&B fan, if you're into really weird progressive noise. There's folk metal, there's Christian metal, there's death metal, there's grindcore. There's so many different facets.
There literally is something for everyone in that.
Absolutely everyone. So if somebody thinks, I don't like metal, they just haven't heard the right band yet.
I'm so pleased we're doing this podcast today. This is so timely. And this is season 3 of Start Here, and I can't believe we've never done metal before. So I guess, well, for everyone really, including me, where does metal sit in that kind of rock music canon?
It's the harder edge, isn't it? Obviously hard rock into metal, and then all the offshoots of metal. It's a massive, massive genre. Obviously metal being like the heavier, harder edge side of hard rock, I guess. What do you think?
But it also depends who you speak to, because everyone's going to have different opinions on where that line sits. So we were trying to discuss this last night.
That hard rock and metal line.
Yeah.
That threshold.
Or even pop and metal,
Right.
like where is the line of where it sits? And I think even I don't think even we agree on where the line is.
Because I think chronologically there were bands we were referencing when we were talking about this that were like, well, they're in the metal genre. And I was like, no, that's more hard rock. But back then, it might have been like this was the heaviest thing at the time. But it's just, you fast forward 20, 30, 40 years, and things get so heavy now.
That's interesting. Is it all relative then? So those things which might not be perceived as metal now, is it all relative? Could they have been the sort of forefathers of metal then? And in which case, when did that start? Who are those?
So we were talking about this, and I think there's some conjecture about I think Steppenwolf was dropped as being maybe they coined the journalist coined the term heavy metal when they described Born to Be Wild as being heavy metal.
Yeah.
And then I think Jimi Hendrix had the same. The term was thrown around Jimi Hendrix, late 60s. But then you compare that sound to what you can listen to in 2025, and it doesn't sound heavy by comparison. I think just the way things have evolved, metal as a genre, I think the envelope's been pushed by artists to the point where how can we be heavier? How can we detune more? How can it be more extreme? And that pushes stuff from back then into it sounds softer as a result.
But I think as well, like it started with the bands that were experimenting with blues rock.
Right.
So you had your bands like Led Zeppelin, your Deep Purples. But I think really the general consensus, there will be people who disagree with this, and they can send me a message and argue with me on Instagram. But I think
going to break the internet again, Sophie.
And this is what happens, dishonest, because I don't know if there's any other genre where people get so passionate, because the thing with metal is metal isn't just a genre, it's an identity, and it affects how you dress, it affects how you do your makeup, it affects what you do in your free time, who you make friends with, what you read, it affects what you watch, it affects absolutely everything. But I think the consensus generally is it started with Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
Love that. So why is metal so unique in that sort of rock pantheon?
I would say, and I think you're probably better to speak on this, the thing that makes it unique is the fact that it all was born from an accident and an injury. Yeah,
so I think what you're referring to is the guitar player from Black Sabbath, Tony Iommi, who's a lefty like me, represent. He lost the tips of his fingers in like a work-related accident, like, some industrial machine chopped the tips of his fingers off. Wow. And so to make playing guitar, he was inspired by Django Reinhardt, the gypsy jazz guitar player, who only had two fingers. Well, I think maybe three fingers. I can't remember. It was two or three fingers. He had a reduced amount of fingers that he could play with. And Tony Iommi thought, well, if this guy can do it, then I need to give this a shot still. And what he did, he melted down some plastic and made little tips for the ends of his fingers, and detuned his guitar to make it easier to play, or to be able to approach the kind of music he wanted to play a bit easier. And this whole sound was born from it. And it's that guitar detuning thing is massively prevalent throughout metal now.
Tony Iommi.
Yeah, I guess.
Fascinating stuff. So we've touched on Black Sabbath and the origins or the firsts to do this. Take us back to the 60s and 70s in more forensic detail and where this all started. Who were those sort of founding bands? And let's expand on this a little bit.
So I think you do have your bands like Led Zeppelin, your bands like Deep Purple, who, they started themselves as there's always a lot of argument about where rock came from, where metal came from. But Deep Purple did start as a blues band.
Yeah.
That was what they did. And then they evolved. But I think really when you come to the reason we keep pressing on about Black Sabbath is what they did is I think they'd watched like a horror film or something.
Yeah.
And they wanted to bring that level of anxiety to their stage performance. And I think when you create metal, it was about creating a shock value. And I think that's something that Sabbath were able to do, artists like Alice Cooper, creating this show that you go to see, and it's horrifying in some ways, and it's like something you've never seen before. And I think that's what metal has always done. When you go through the generations, it's about pushing the boundaries and trying to essentially create a space for teenagers to rebel against their parents, isn't it?
Yeah,
in
I guess
many
if you
ways.
go before that, you've got like the end of psychedelia. So you've got Jimi Hendrix Experience, bands like that, taking drugs. That's a huge prevalent part of the sound. Yeah. And then, you can kind of, they all came out of that 60s thing where everyone's trying to be pop.
Yeah.
And then you can sort of see as people's hair gets that bit longer, and so too the music gets heavier. Yes. And so you get into the 70s where, like Sophie said, bands like Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, all that kind of thing became hugely successful. And I think stepping out of the psychedelic drugs thing, I think, like you were saying about Black Sabbath, the element of like witchcraft and religion and all these overtones comes into music, which is something which had never been allowed to happen before. Like I think Deep Purple, Ritchie Blackmore was well up on his occult.
Yeah, there's kind of metaphysical aspects as well. It's fascinating stuff. We've got the guitar, and we've got an array of pedals and very colourful stuff on the floor here. And I think it's about time we hear what we're talking about here. So the DNA of metal, what does that sound like? What's it like to experience the sound of a metal chord for the first time? The harmonies. I've got a piano here, so I can do a certain amount. Okay. Mikey, would you do us the honour of...
Have you done it again?
Absolutely.
Is this another one of those questions where it's like the biggest question in the world? What is the sound of metal?
What is the sound of metal? Give us the sound of metal.
The weird thing
Mikey
is every metalhead will have an opinion on what the sound is.
Well, we were talking about this yesterday, and I think the thread that runs through metal is that we're talking about guitars at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And talking about distortion. And I think, there's people who would argue that bands like Nine Inch Nails, and you go down the industrial side of things, where even that, we were talking about a band called Clowncore the other day. There's no guitar present, but it's keyboard, saxophone, really distorted. And I think that's the sort of the DNA of metal is like a distorted instrument, mainly a guitar.
Okay.
And so I think if you've got that going on, you're halfway.
You're halfway there. Let's hear it, Mikey.
I'm going to move this out of the way. I'll give you a demonstration of the kind of noises.
Bringing in the hardware.
Yeah.
This is, I take it, Senza plastic tips on the ends of your fingers.
Yeah, I don't have any. Luckily, all my fingers are my own.
All fingers are intact.
All my fingers
Is
are
this
my
your signature?
own. So yeah, this is. I will
signature.
plug this now. This is my signature electric guitar.
This is your signature.
This is made for me by a company called Manson's, and it's made in a specific way to sort of be able to handle the kind of things that I throw at it. So, for example, it's detuned. This is tuned to drop C.
Okay.
So it's 2 whole steps down from standard.
Yeah.
And then the bottom string is dropped another 2 notes.
Detuned as well. Oh,
right.
wow.
So you get a heavier sound. It kind of, and it opens up songs and vocals to be.
Okay.
So yeah. So.
Super cool. So I love that sound as well.
We have to teach you to headbang.
Oh, I was almost there. It was very polite, but a few more lessons. It's interesting. So chordally, I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm right there in terms of, the biggest and best metal tracks that I've heard. And I've been listening to a lot in the last couple of days.
Wow. I'm
especially
sorry.
with your playlist.
Sorry. I send you quite heavy songs. I'm so sorry.
I'm surprised you turned up. I'm surprised you're not in tears. But fair play.
But just with my classical head on, we're locked in. You said it's detuned, but it sounds like it's there on this. So it's the equivalent of a like C major, but then you're using these chromatics, and then you also did this dissonant with the G and the F sharp. And so. Those kind of features, that feels typical to me, oscillating between major and minor, but also chromatics, smallest difference between 2 notes, but it has a very minor feel.
Yeah,
talk to us about that.
It's not necessarily, I guess a lot of my approach to playing is adapting kind of what we would call power chords.
Yeah.
So kind of, there isn't necessarily
so
any,
E-flat,
there's not necessarily any kind of like extension in there to make it definitely minor.
No, and that's the interesting thing as well, because there is no third. So we're not hearing just from what you just played. I just heard nothing to define it.
Right.
In terms of is
I
it
guess it's just the root, the fifth, and then an octave above it.
Indeed. Yeah.
And then I would put in other things like maybe put in.
You've got the third above there, so that's C minor.
Yeah, and then with a D on the top of it.
With a D on the top of
that. Things like that. Again, just accidentally finding shapes on the guitar, which just have these little extension, which give it a little bit of personality.
Yeah.
But a lot of riffs that you hear in bands, like you said about the chromatic thing, like. I'm only moving 3 notes there, but it sounds like more movement than it is, and I threw in a little harmonic kind of thing, which is
Yeah.
Another thing that's really prevalent in metal, like those kind of pinched. I think that metal's one of the places where it's still acceptable to have guitar solos and things like that. Metal's a place where people can show their skills and their dominance.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not uncommon for songs, in when you step into the genre, maybe not on the outskirts, right, with kind of super popular charting metal, but certainly once you step past that, you'd see guitarists who are playing big long solos. And there are some bands, some artists who dedicate their whole craft to that sort of thing. One of the things we disagreed about, which you clocked, I think yesterday, was like, I should have sent a Dragon Force track. And Dragon Force are 1,000,000 miles per hour, more notes than you can fit into, than you can shake a stick at. It is relentless.
Like I was thinking, trying to send you Flight of the Bumblebee, played on guitar.
Yeah. Like,
Wild.
Yeah,
Wild.
And some guitarists dedicate their whole lives and their whole craft to like pursuing that speed, more notes per second.
Rimsky-Korsakov.
That was never really my thing. I was more of a
guitar.
songs person and found myself in this kind of being drawn towards stuff with a groove and a riff.
No, I love that. I must admit, just listening to that playlist, I felt possessed for at least half of it.
Yeah.
Seriously, I know I'm not even joking.
I know. I'm laughing.
I had to turn it off, but isn't it incredible that music can do that?
Yeah,
it's like they've weaponized it.
Yeah.
And can you imagine? And I remember when I was listening to it as well. This is your playlist. I remember thinking, what if I were locked in a room and this was an instrument of torture and you couldn't get out and this was blasting free? I don't mean this in an unkind way, because in one way it's totally brilliant. Because, thinking about classical, thinking about the most subversive piece of Stravinsky, for instance, you're talking about a composer whose music provoked riots at the time. I can well imagine this music provoking the same kind of response, such as its visceral power.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredible. Whether one likes it or not is that's not the issue. It's not the thing. It's the fact that this music is just so incredibly powerful.
I think you make a great point there. And I think something you could say about metal is that I don't think it makes the mistake of trying to be for everyone. And I guess where mainstream music, pop music, its approach is mass appeal. We want to sell units. We want to bring more people in. Yeah. Whereas with metal, I think there's more of an assertion of, this is not for everyone, but if you're into this, you are in and you are welcome. And you are in the gang, you're all in. But if you're not, that is absolutely fine and we get it. Yeah. Because it isn't for everyone. You listening to a band like we're talking about, it's supposed to shock. It's an assault. And that's what they're going for. They're not trying to take the edge off that. And there's a respect to that.
Yeah.
For anyone who wants to know, that band that we're referencing right now is Lorna Shore. And what's hilarious is a lot of metalheads will tell you that they're lightweight and that they're pop. And so just so you know as
savage.
well.
Savage.
So a lot of metal has been used in places like Guantanamo Bay. That is often used as a form of torture.
That's what I was thinking about when I was...
Yeah.
And
it's weird because I get the same reaction that you're probably talking about that most people get from metal. I get that with electronic music. So I get that with, obviously not all electronic, but with house music, absolutely. It's like my skin starts itching, wants to crawl off my body.
It puts you right off, doesn't it?
It makes me feel physically sick. But yet with metal, and I just touched the surface there. There's some bands that like jazz, experiment, all sorts.
Yeah.
With metal, it calms me.
Yeah.
And it's like the more intense it gets, the more calm my brain gets. And I think that's something that a lot of metalheads have in common.
It regulates your rhythms in a way.
And there's something about going to see it live, because we're talking about these bands and we're saying it's underground, Mike. We're talking about it. I think underground sometimes gets confused with size. And when you looked at the stats that Live Nation were putting out this year, rock and metal is pretty much outperforming any other genres when it comes to live sales. When it comes to T-shirt sales, these genres are second only to K-pop. And so it's like...
That's astonishing.
You've got 3 or 4 day festivals that have 80, 90, 100,000 people in attendance. You've got...
Download's the second biggest single site UK festival, second only to Glastonbury.
Right. And yet, even interestingly, when we started this conversation, this podcast, I think you said I can't believe we haven't done metal yet, and we're in series 3. And because I think the mainstream kind of looks at hard rock, heavy metal as kind of hilarious or kind of
niche,
right? Kind of niche, exactly. Whereas when you dig in, it's absolutely huge.
It's massive.
Well, the stats
it's
don't
more
lie.
huge than I can wrap my head around because there's so many subgenres.
Yeah. In terms of vocals and vocal styles in these bands, and I imagine that it's just, it's like how long's a piece of string. But what are we talking about? The evolution of blues and rocks into what we have now, vocal styles and delivery. Yep. Can you give us some basic tenets of vocals?
Yeah, I think again, prowess is a big part of it. So even talking about Led Zeppelin, Robert Plant, known for his incredible voice, not just a guy who mumbles the blues.
Yeah.
Almost operatically powerful.
Yeah.
Lots of 70s hard rock singers, same approach, just huge vocals leading into the 80s, I guess, like bands like Iron Maiden, like Bruce Dickinson.
Yeah, his falsetto is unbelievable.
This massive, operatic, huge...
And the range, as you say, in that treble range.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? That obviously you've got some of the bassy stuff and the stuff in the midriff, so to speak, musically, and then these very high-range, pitched falsetto voices. You cited operatic. How did that start?
It's a great question. I think, honestly, when I think about the first band I can think of who the vocalist was really putting themselves out that way, I have to think about Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin, really. Maybe he was aping somebody else, but that's when I think of the most popular band from that sort of blues rock into 70s rock, classic rock. Robert Plant had such an amazing voice. Yeah. Still has an amazing voice.
Even when you think of where Ozzy Osbourne was taking it, and where he took those notes and where he played around, there was a lot more because it was clean vocals predominantly back then.
A lot of wailing.
So it was a lot of wailing. Yeah. That's a good word to put it. A lot of wailing. And I think that will have had impact on bands like Maiden and the new wave of British heavy metal and all of that kind of movement. And then I think it's when you start to get, and everything that I am talking about here, it will have started before with more underground bands, but I'm going to talk just more in the mainstream, the mainstream of the underground, which is complicated. But so you had that movement, but then you also had the punk movement, which was a lot of blah, 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 blah. So that was a lot of that kind of vocal. Yeah. And that was mainly a very British thing as well, but it also had its impact in America. And I think that had an impact on vocals as well, that 70s. Because you were either a metal fan or a punk.
Got it.
In those 70s.
Yeah, and I think the difference being how serious are you about your musicianship, potentially, whereas punk, that wasn't necessarily a criteria.
It wasn't the currency.
But metal, I don't think back then, you couldn't be a metal musician unless you had some chops and you knew what you were doing and you knew your instrument well, whether that be your voice or drums or guitar or whatever, keys,
And then you start to see the kind of more the groove metal as well coming in. You're starting to see the emergence of new metal, so there's a lot more mixing of genres as well, so that new metal will mix in elements of hip-hop in there as well, because at the time you had that rise of, you were either into rap and hip-hop or you were into rock, and so those fusions start to happen. So you start to see that. You've also got the death metal coming in of the 80s, you've got that vibe, you've got bands like Slayer.
That's where vocals get a lot more aggressive.
That's when it starts to get really, really aggressive. And I think what you do is you start to see the vocals breaking down into different areas. You start to see the guitar, the playing, everything breaking down, and then people taking those and running with them in different directions. And that's why metal is so vast. Yeah. So vast.
Is there a musical difference, very real, demonstrable musical difference between the punk, grunge, and the thing?
I would say so. There's a Venn diagram for sure.
I was so hoping you'd say that. Yeah. Would you do a C on it? So just give us a burst of this. So grunge, punk, thrash metal. Can you just get about 3 or 4?
Oof. Okay.
And a line about each and what it sounds like.
So I guess thrash metal. Again, I'm going to be eaten alive by purists out there going, "What is this guy talking about?" But thrash metal, I suppose, coming out of the 80s, thrash metal was a lot faster, shared more similarities with other types of metal. Yeah. And you'd have things like, I guess, you'd have things like a gallop. I could say that was kind of.
Yes, I was feeling the thrash. I could, because it was thrash is very driving
Rhythmically
music.
driven.
Yeah, and
very
it's quite,
driving.
it's quite up tempo. And then when you get into punk, obviously, I would say not necessarily any less distorted, but more bar chords, more. You know, more, a bit more, less detuned, less heavy.
Whereas thrash added in a bit more of the technical as well, but they both had that element of being able to stand at the front and shout back the lyrics, and I think they both brought that. I don't think you can talk about metal and talk about all of these genres without talking about the violence of a live show, can you? Because I think that is one of the most intimidating things to any music fans.
The violence of a live show.
And I think
the potential for violence.
The potential.
Well, it is, I would say, it is violence, but it's actually the most organised, controlled, loving violence.
Okay.
So it's more like, because have you heard of a mosh pit?
Yeah.
So it's more, I would say, of a scrum in rugby.
Yeah.
It's more of a way for these, particularly, and let's be honest here, it was young males who were. This is in times where there's no jobs. There's a lot of rebellion needed against what was happening in society, and these males would take out those emotions by going out to these places and just screaming these lyrics and running into each other. But the biggest rule that people don't talk about, or people don't understand when they're outside the genre, is there is a rule amongst metalheads: if you see someone fall, you pick them up, because it's about getting these emotions out, but it's not about creating violence towards each other until you start getting to like hardcore shows. And you start.
Oh, so it does
like
exist.
Intentional violence, but
intentional
again,
violence.
it's in that kind of like Fight Club almost thing, where it's like you know what you're getting yourself into, but there's something about, like you said, young people wanting to have some kind of release.
The energy,
right?
And this, when you see it, so you'll see this often. You'll see these like. There'll be active people in the mosh pit who are kind of directing it. It's really weird. It becomes this like orchestrated dance.
Yeah.
And they'll be slamming into each other, pushing each other, doing all this stuff. And at the end, when the mosh pit kind of winds down, you'll see maybe a couple more of guys laughing, hugging each other.
Yeah.
Topless, they're hugging each other, high-fiving each other.
Yeah.
It's like...
It's community.
I can't explain it.
Yeah.
It sounds so bizarre.
When you hear that stuff, the more violent stuff, when you listen to it rather, what do you hear? Because when I hear it, I know what I hear, and it's rage, and it's to use a classical term, fortissimo. It's everything at the extremity, and it sort of takes me to my extremities, as it were. But when you hear that, when you listen, what do you hear?
I guess, right. My brain's going a million miles an hour, and I'll be honest, I do have ADHD, and I think when I listen to metal, I'm hearing everything at once, all at the same time, and I hear a lot of emotion to it, and I hear a lot of motivation, and to me it almost sounds like comfort and a calmness. Sometimes I hear jauntiness, sometimes I'll have a song that amps me up for the gym, and so I think I hear, because I listen to heavier music than you, don't I, Mike?
Typically, yeah. I mean, like you say, I only really listen to really heavy stuff when I'm in the gym, just because it's that extra, gives you that extra sort of like stimulus to kind of feel like
to push through.
Yeah,
yeah.
I find that really useful for that.
Yeah,
but typically you listen to more heavy stuff.
I think
recreationally.
If you sat down with a load of metalheads and did a cross section, especially when you're looking in the 80s and times like that, I think you particularly would find a lot of working class people. I think it is a genre of music that was able to create that community for people who see that everything isn't perfect in the world and are experiencing that everything isn't perfect. And some people might disagree. I think as more money came into metal, we started to see more even upper middle class people making music, and we've seen that across all genres. But I think for me, with metal, I think if you got a therapist in a room with a bazillion metal fans, life is really hard, and sometimes life can be more cruel to some people than it can to others. And I think as a society, globally, we're not set up for that. We're not set up to hold people through the worst things that life can throw at people. And there will be people out there who come from perfect, and I know people actually, who are very middle class, come from perfect 2.4 families, so this wouldn't apply to them. But I think for a lot of metalheads, they've experienced the darkest corners of life. And I think listening to this music is a way to feel those emotions and connect to those emotions and work through those emotions and not feel judged or weird or different, and be able to process them. Yeah, I really do.
Yeah, really interesting.
I think going back to something we were talking about, just this was pertinent. When you asked about what's the common thread, or, what's to someone to be drawn to metal, what is a common thread? I mean, we talk about when we were younger and at the time being drawn to certain things. And it's only now as like adults who like know ourselves well that we could probably say, if we were honest, that there's, that people have a lot of trauma in their lives, and people grow up with a lot of trauma as children and that kind of thing. And I think that massively plays into being drawn to kinds of music which in some way speak to a part of you that needs help or needs to heal or is experiencing trauma. And I think there was probably a massive cross-section of metal fans and alternative music who have experienced difficulty, trauma, pain in their lives that like metal speaks to, in that sense, where it's like a safe place to kind of vent and exorcise these demons and things like that.
You didn't go to therapy in like... Therapy's a new thing. People talking about therapy or self-care and all this nonsense. Like, if you think of the early noughties and the way things were, people weren't walking around saying...
No, it was get on with it.
It was get on with it.
Get on with it.
Deal with it. We all go through shit. Like, you've got to just sort it out. You're struggling with neurodivergence. You're struggling with all of these things. It was like, well, deal with it. We don't come from sympathetic times. And so metal there was so much anger as well, like to deal with that anger. Yeah. Like, I think for a lot of men as well, these are conversations that are happening now, and I keep talking about men. I think there are women that are into metal, but there tends to be more now, and I think there were certain pockets that women were more attracted to, but I used to go to shows where it was entirely men, and I would be the only woman.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because that was my next question, really. And obviously, you're enjoying a fantastic career with your incredible insights we're hearing now and expertise in the genre. But I imagine that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is dominated by, or certainly in the early years, dominated by white males. And so my question is what was it like cutting through in that way and making a name for yourself in the way that you have? Can you tell me about that particular part of your journey?
It was awful. It was absolutely awful. Because sometimes I'm like, what? How did I do it? How did I manage to make it? But I always wanted to be a TV or radio presenter. I started doing radio at the age of 12. It was really hard to break in because, I think the unique position I was in is, I am female, which wasn't really a thing apart from the females that were very highly sexualized, and I wasn't someone who was sexualizing myself in that way. I was taking a different approach to interviews. So people didn't fancy me. I wasn't like, quote unquote, attractive, because there's a certain demographic of white males that it doesn't matter how attractive you are as a black mixed female. It doesn't matter how attractive you are on that scale, you will never even be at a 1 for those white males. And so it was really hard forging this career that I had, but I had so much experience and so much knowledge, and I'm just stubborn. It's what I wanted to do. So I set up the first ever MySpace metal video channel in the UK. So no one else was doing it. And I worked in telly at the time, so you'd have to have my friend would turn up with these big broadcast cameras at these gigs. That's the only video cameras, but it meant it gave me access to bands that at the level I was at, I probably shouldn't have had access to.
Because of the infrastructure, everything around you.
I was like, I'm going to make videos and I'm going to put them up here. So everyone was like, oh, okay, yeah, you can turn up. But it was hard. Like, there's been so many times throughout the years, as a woman, you get laughed at. People think you're just in it to date men or whatever. And it's what's been nice is getting to the position that I'm at now, and also being older. There's a lot of ageism in this industry, and it's so much nicer being older and stand toe to toe and say and call shit out.
Yeah.
Like when you're 20, you're like, you have to I just got to be nice all the time.
Yeah.
As well, because there's all that thing, and I've had this in my career. People are so quick to call a black woman a diva, so quick.
Oh my goodness me,
you're
tropes.
Aggressive. You're a diva. I used to get, whoa, a black chick that likes rock. This is awesome. When I interviewed bands like Slayer, now I get very racist comments.
Now, most recently, you mean?
More recently, in these last 5 years, I get very racist comments. But since I've taken that next step to a next level as well. And I think it's the same for your band, Mike, because I know you're sat here as a white man, but I think you've had to come to a lot of realizations as to having a black frontman.
Yeah, I guess my perspective is somewhat unique, given that my band leans heavily on black music.
I heard this in the tracks. Loved it, by the way. Skindred. Yeah.
And that in rock and metal, in metal, is a rarity. We're not completely surrounded by. There's not a huge number of black artists within metal.
No,
it's a predominantly white.
Do you remember Naked Truth?
No.
Naked Truth. Three black guys with dreads.
Right.
I think they came out of Atlanta. The only reason why I know them is because one of my best mates was in the band.
Right.
They got signed to S2.
A big song.
Sony imprint. Fight.
Okay, I have to look it up. I might know it.
Yeah. I love that song. It was just so angry. And this is not, one of my mates who got plucked from obscurity and there's scientists. But I mean, it's great to see that mix. And the interesting thing is ushering in that kind of awareness of other types of music for hip hop fans. And this is how I came to discover, rock and metal fans is largely through hip hop, because I love hip hop as well. What influence would you say has heavy metal had on different genres, and where is that most notable? Would you say?
Well, I'd say for a start, hip hop. I've always said this. I think hip hop and metal are two sides of the same coin. They do the same thing, and
they share a lot of DNA.
They share a lot of DNA, and I think there's a lot of because of the division of black and white.
Yeah.
And what happened with that, I think there was you have to pick a side, and so sides started to hate each other, and I think there's a lot of judgment on both sides actually, because I know coming from having a lot of African family who are very Christian, I can tell you it doesn't go down well being a metalhead covered in tattoos. And I've been called a traitor many times.
Have you?
Many times.
Tongue in cheek?
No. I had it shouted at me walking through Brixton going to a gig. I've been called a traitor many times.
Okay.
Because I'm not listening to what is quote unquote black music. But there are black spaces within the genre, and I'm very proud that both of us actually, in our ways, have created spaces for that. But in the ways that metal has impacted other music, do you know what? I think it's because there's so many secret metalheads. I heard someone saying Skrillex hangs around the studio with me.
This is what I wanted to talk about. Experimental electronic music and all that distortion, all that kind of stuff.
Skrillex Skrillex is a metalhead.
I didn't know he was a metalhead, but I can certainly hear.
Skrillex did From First to Last, which was a metalcore project, essentially, and then started playing around with electronic elements and made it so big in that world that he did From First to Last, made a big name, but made it even bigger. And so you've got those impacts. You've got Taylor Swift, who is a massive fan of Korn. You've got Lady Gaga, who you can quite clearly see in her shows. I think Lady Gaga even wearing the meat dress that she wore in 2000,
I remember that.
Whatever it was. That is, I can't remember which artist it is now. My brain's completely gone. But that is taken from a very famous artist who actually hasn't been credited enough, who did a whole series of that type of thing. You've got, there's a lot of pop and pop artists. Halsey, for example, she wanted to be more alternative and is into bands like A Day to Remember. But she knew that as a woman, she was rejected with her first album, Badlands, in a lot of that realm. We're also seeing it in a lot of music today with rap, with hip hop.
Yeah.
they're bringing in elements of, there's a lot of metal coming in, isn't there? We're seeing Megan Thee Stallion did a track with the band Spirit Box. We're seeing, who's the guy that has the diamond in his head? I can't remember, the big jewel that he puts, Lil Uzi Vert.
I mean, you lost me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we're seeing
okay.
and with emo rap, like...
He did a song that I really loved, Lil Uzi Vert. I can't remember the name of it, but there is one song that I thought, gosh, that is just incredible, the power of it.
Yeah, and so we're seeing that, but then we're seeing, like, in electronic music, it happens as well. So, like, too many DJs will often mix Slayer into Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
And so it's like, name a genre, and you're going to see that there's some influence there.
You're going to see some influence. So we talked about cross-genre influence. What would you say is the next frontier for heavy metal influence? Where are we now and where are we headed? That's a big question, isn't it?
See, I have a theory of where it's going. And I think TikTok has breathed new life into rock and metal in a way that we haven't seen since MySpace.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing now, whereas Skindred were an outlier, they were the only band really that were so popular bringing in black influences in the music from the voice of a black man. And I think what we're seeing now is more women in bands. We're seeing more women screaming, doing brutally heavy music, which we have seen in the past. There are, and before anyone comes for me, I acknowledge that there's been a lot of symphonic metal and all of those. I don't know if you've listened to any of those classically trained artists who are there's operatic metal, that's the whole thing, Within Temptation.
Nightwish, bands like that.
Sharon Denandel's voice is unbelievable. And so there was that influence there, but we're seeing these young kids on TikTok who are getting into it, but they're also bringing R&B elements are coming back again, but this time with vocalists who are black. And I think we're seeing more black people getting into metal. Actually, what we're also seeing is Spotify put out a study a couple of years ago, which said the fastest growing audience of metal fans is in Africa.
Yeah.
So we're seeing this, like, and I'm not even kidding, there are bands like this, I think they're called, I can't remember the name, is it Overthrust? And they are a band from Botswana. They wear head to toe leather, cowboy leather.
Yeah.
And we're seeing like these metal bands and these like tiny little scenes.
Yeah.
It's obviously religious and so prevalent out there.
Indeed.
So we're seeing that rebellion. So I think we're going to see bands coming from abroad. We're seeing bands like The Who.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay.
Mongolian vocals on metal. We're seeing that. We're seeing Bloodywood.
So for you, it's the future is the diversity of expression.
Absolutely. Yeah. More inclusive.
Yeah.
More diversity. I think it's definitely a really good point.
That's
Mikey's just come back from playing in the Philippines, massive venue in the Philippines at a tattoo, like India, massive crowds.
Yeah, massive metal
crowds in India. Who would have thought so?
Humongous. And I think we've been there a couple of times, and you know, the kind of festivals we're used to playing range from being we can be the heaviest thing at a lighter festival, we can be like the lightest thing at a very heavy festival.
I sent you some Sleep Token as well, right? So Sleep Token are a band who have blown up on TikTok.
Yeah.
They sometimes had some like tech elements in there,
right?
But then they'll just the song I sent you just at the end becomes this kind of jazzy R&B song.
Yeah.
At the end, and we're seeing a lot more people challenging what is metal.
Yeah, it's a brave fusion.
I love that brave new frontier.
Yeah. And that band particularly have absolutely divided opinion about is it metal, is it not?
Yeah.
And I always but we've talked about it, and you know, they flirt with very clean guitar singing. And there's the recent single. Caramel. It was a dancehall song.
Caramel.
It was a dancehall song, like a dancehall pop song, and then 2.5 minutes in, this massive distorted guitar comes out of nowhere.
Awesome.
And it's like, oh well, okay, there it is. And I guess that's the thread. That's the DNA that allows it to live within the genre. I mean, my band's a metal band. We've got straight up reggae songs that don't have an ounce of metal in them, but we're still considered a metal band.
I love that. We've covered so much today, haven't we? We've been here, there, and everywhere.
Do you feel more confused?
I just feel I want to listen to more, which is it's a great place to be. I want to listen to more. I want to listen to everything that you've mentioned. And I think what I wasn't expecting was a kind of like the range of nuance
Right.
I wasn't expecting access to vulnerability in the way that you've described so beautifully as well. And this has opened up a whole new world to me. So I'm deeply grateful to both of you. What amazing guests.
Oh, thank you.
Sophie
Thank you so
K,
I've got to
Mikey
tell
Demus.
you, we argued so much about what songs to send across after the fact. We were absolutely split decision.
Yeah.
I was like, you got to send that.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
We could have gone on and on and on.
I hope you can maybe do something. I would like to see more. I'd like to see more classical, because I think there's a big link between metal and classical music. And I've heard some of the rage that can happen in metal
And
songs
we've leaned
being
into that
classical.
today, haven't we? Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd love to see some more, some piano.
Yeah, some more piano in it. One final question, if I may.
Yeah.
So for new metal fans, and there will be legions of metal fans having listened to this, can you give us maybe three to four bands who people should be definitely tuning into and listening to?
You're doing it again?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, I know.
Wait, new bands. So new bands
Yeah.
that maybe people who are new to the genre and the
Not
bands
new
they
bands,
should listen to, or
just bands
Just
that
three
people
bands.
should... Three bands that people should start their metal journey with.
so they've never listened to metal. Because if you like metal already,
I think you're overthinking.
So
I'm
they-
overthinking. That's not like me.
So they've never listened to metal. So
Okay.
literally, it's someone who's never listened to metal. They maybe heard this chat and think, that's
Okay.
kind of interesting. And they're going to go to their favorite DSP provider and start a playlist.
Okay.
Which three bands should they start with?
You have to say Black Sabbath.
Thank you.
You have to. You absolutely have to. Let's fast forward like 20 years, something from the 90s.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? See, now you're going through it.
I would say Metallica. Metallica, absolutely
Black
indispensable.
Sabbath, Metallica, they're in.
And something
Third-
from
Third one.
from today, from like the last 10, 15
Skindred
years.
and Skindred.
And Skindred, there we
go.
have it. Perfect.
well,
in every
do I
way.
get to say my bands, or is it just his?
Let's have another three. Let's have
Okay.
another three.
This is stressful. Because I was going to say, if you
Yeah.
like R&B and you're coming from that world, then I would say check out a band called Sleep Theory.
Sleep Theory.
If you're coming from, you're really curious about these heavy vocals,
Yeah.
I would say check out, these are all young bands that are doing well. I would say check out a band like Motionless in White, who are very horror-based.
Motionless in White. Sleep Theory.
And these are all quite, so a lot of metalheads will hate me
Yeah.
for saying this. And who else would you say? And I would say, finally, just check out Meshuggah Bleed. Just listen to that song, because I imagine there's going to be a lot of musicians listen to this.
Sugar Bleed.
Listen to
Meshuggah.
Meshuggah, M-E.
Band's called Meshuggah.
Meshuggah Bleed.
There's another band I would say, which I'd love you to check out. Actually.
Okay.
A band
You've done it
called,
now.
Animals as Leaders,
Animals as Leaders, yes.
which I think you would really dig.
Yeah.
Animals as Leaders.
It's instrumental.
Yeah.
I nearly sent that one.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go.
We need a part two next
Do
series.
we need a part
Next
two?
series.
This is going to be a whole.
Where do I
series,
sign,
so-
or where do you sign? Listen, thank you so much, Sophie K,
Thank you.
Mikey Demus. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Start Here, which is brought to you by the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music. If you liked today's episode, why not go back and check out the other two series of Start Here? If you liked heavy metal, you might also enjoy our episode on opera with the fantastic Freddie Tommaso. That's a must. Follow ABRSM on TikTok and Instagram and tell us what genre of music you want to be unpacked next.